The crack of the rifle echoed across the pristine grounds of the Blackwater Elite Shooting Academy, followed by a silence so profound it seemed to swallow sound itself. Through the high-powered spotting scope, the target at 1,000 yards away showed a hole so perfectly centered, it appeared machine-made. The electronic measurement system flickered, recalculated, then displayed numbers that made seasoned marksmen question their eyesight. "That's impossible," whispered Marcus Webb, his voice barely audible in the stunned quiet that had fallen over the observation platform. The equipment must be malfunctioning, but the military snipers present knew what they were seeing. This wasn't equipment malfunction or lucky accident. This was the kind of shooting that entered into legend, performed by someone with capabilities that defied conventional understanding. The woman who had just shattered a world record that had stood unchallenged for 15 years stood quietly behind her rifle, showing none of the excitement or celebration that might be expected from someone who had just achieved something extraordinary. Sarah Michella, 42-year-old woman in basic jeans and a navy cardigan, had not only hit the bullseye at an impossible distance, she had done it with precision that the range's sophisticated measurement systems initially refused to register. The shot placement was accurate to fractions of an inch at a distance where even professional snipers considered a hit anywhere on target to be exceptional performance. But 12 hours earlier, this same woman had been told she didn't belong at this elite facility, dismissed as a housewife playing soldier by men who had never faced real combat. Colonel James Harrison, the facility's founder and self-proclaimed master marksman, had practically laughed her out of the building, suggesting she might be more comfortable at a knitting circle than a precision shooting range. How wrong he had been. The question that hung in the air as observers stared at the impossible target wasn't just about the shot itself, it was about everything that shot represented. Who was Sarah Mitchell? Really? How had someone with no documented competitive experience, no military credentials, no formal training records, just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded those of Olympic champions and military specialists? This is the story of how assumptions, arrogance, and the dangerous underestimation of quiet strength led to one of the most shocking moments in competitive shooting history. It's a story about the price of corruption, the power of justice delayed but not denied, and the extraordinary capabilities that sometimes hide behind the most ordinary appearances. Sarah's journey to this moment had begun 20 years earlier in classified operations where failure meant international incidents or mass casualties. Her exceptional visual acuity, combined with an almost supernatural ability to process ballistic calculations under extreme stress, had made her one of the most valuable assets in the United States military's special operations community. But tragedy had forced her to bury that identity, choosing to live quietly as a suburban widow while the skills that had once made her legendary lay dormant. Until today, the decision to come to Blackwater Elite hadn't been made lightly. 3 months earlier, Sarah had discovered that Colonel Harrison had been systematically defrauding veteran disability claims, using his Pentagon connections to deny benefits to soldiers who couldn't fight back. Her own benefits had been among those targeted, but more importantly, money that should have gone to veterans' families, including her late husband's posthumous benefits, had been diverted to fund Harrison's luxury lifestyle. Research into Harrison's background had revealed a pattern of corruption that stretched back years, but his connections and carefully constructed reputation made him virtually untouchable through official channels. Sarah had tried reporting her findings to various agencies, only to watch her complaints disappear into bureaucratic black holes. Sometimes, Sarah had realized, justice required a more direct approach. Sometimes the most powerful statement wasn't made with words, but with actions that spoke louder than any accusation ever could. The impossible shot that had just shattered records and stunned observers was more than a demonstration of skill. It was the opening move in a reckoning 20 years in the making. 24 hours earlier, Sarah Mitchell had approached the imposing gates of Blackwater Elite Shooting Academy on a crisp October morning, her modest Honda Civic looking distinctly out of place among the parade of luxury SUVs and military-style trucks that dominated the parking area. The facility itself was a monument to exclusivity sprawling across 200 acres of prime Virginia countryside, with buildings that resembled a cross between a military compound and an exclusive country club. Blackwater Elite wasn't just any shooting range. Founded by former military contractors and catering to wealthy enthusiasts, government agencies, and private security firms, it represented the pinnacle of tactical training facilities. Its membership fees alone exceeded most people's annual salaries, and its reputation for exclusivity was matched only by its disdain for anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of a serious shooter. As Sarah walked through the main entrance, conversations ceased and heads turned. At 42, she carried herself with an understated confidence that most people mistook for uncertainty. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore basic jeans and a navy cardigan attire that would prove to be a lightning rod for the prejudices lurking beneath the academy's polished veneer. The reception area felt more like a gentleman's club than a public facility. With its mahogany paneling and displays of military memorabilia, behind the reception desk sat Marcus Webb, a man whose perfectly pressed tactical clothing and array of military patches told the story of someone desperately trying to project an authority he'd never actually earned in combat. "Ma'am, I think you might be lost," Webb said without looking up from his computer, his tone carrying the practiced dismissal of someone who considered himself the gatekeeper of an exclusive world. "The nearest shopping center is about 5 miles back toward town." Sarah placed her completed registration form on the counter with quiet dignity. "I'm here for the precision shooting evaluation. Zara Mitchell. I should be on your list." Webb's eyes widened slightly as he reluctantly checked his computer. The confusion that flickered across his face was quickly replaced by poorly concealed irritation. There must be some kind of mistake. "The precision evaluation is for experienced marksmen only. Perhaps you meant to sign up for our beginner women's course? It's much more appropriate for someone with your background." The condescension in his voice drew, knowing smirks from other patrons scattered throughout the lobby, all men in expensive tactical gear, who clearly enjoyed watching someone being put in what they considered her proper place. Their conversations had stopped entirely, turning Sarah's registration attempt into an unwelcome spectacle. "I believe my paperwork is in order," Sarah replied calmly. "I've met all the stated requirements and paid the evaluation fee in full." Webb's discomfort was palpable as he scrolled through his computer files. "Ma'am, our precision evaluation involves engaging targets at distances up to 1,000 yards. The participants are typically former military snipers, Olympic competitors, professional marksmen. I really think there's been a misunderstanding about what this program entails." What Webb couldn't have known was that as he spoke, Sarah was conducting her own evaluation. Her trained eyes automatically cataloged the security cameras, escape routes, and potential sightlines habits ingrained by years of operations where such awareness meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She noted the tremor in Webb's hands that suggested either nervousness or stimulant use, and the subtle tells that marked every man in the room as someone who had purchased their tactical credentials rather than earned them through genuine service. Before Sarah could respond to Webb's obvious reluctance to process her registration, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. A commanding presence filled the entrance, and conversations didn't just pause, they stopped entirely, replaced by the kind of respectful silence reserved for undisputed authority. Colonel James Harrison strode through the entrance with the kind of confidence that comes from 30 years of military service and the absolute certainty that he belonged at the top of any hierarchy. At 6'3" with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, Harrison commanded immediate respect through sheer physical presence alone. His uniform was impeccably maintained, adorned with ribbons and decorations that told the story of a distinguished career. Though those familiar with military awards might notice that most represented administrative achievements rather than combat valor, Harrison had built Blackwater Elite into an empire after retiring from his position as a Pentagon procurement officer, a position that had left him wealthy and well-connected. If not particularly battle-tested, his reputation in the shooting community was built on carefully cultivated relationships with defense contractors, government officials, and wealthy enthusiasts who valued exclusivity above all else. What seems to be the problem here? Webb? Harrison's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. His gaze fell on Sarah with the kind of assessment typically reserved for potential security threats. Webb gestured toward Sarah as if presenting evidence in a criminal case. This lady claims she's registered for the precision evaluation. Colonel, obviously, there's been some administrative error. Harrison studied Sarah's registration form with theatrical deliberation, his expression shifting from mild interest to barely concealed amusement. The silence in the lobby was complete now, with every patron watching the interaction with the fascination typically reserved for public spectacles. Mrs. Mitchell, is it? Harrison's tone was perfectly polite, which somehow made his words more cutting than outright hostility would have. I see you've indicated no prior competitive experience, no military background, no formal training credentials. He handed the form back to Webb with practiced precision. I'm afraid our evaluation process is designed for serious practitioners of the shooting arts. The condescension in his voice was so thick it seemed to physically fill the space between them. Around the lobby, other patrons exchanged knowing smirks, clearly enjoying the entertainment of watching someone being corrected by the facility's legendary founder. Perhaps one of our introductory courses would be more suitable for someone with your background, Harrison continued, his pause before the final word loaded with implications. We offer an excellent women's safety course that covers basic firearms handling, much more appropriate for civilian needs. Sarah's response was measured and calm, her voice carrying no trace of the fire that burned behind her gray eyes. The registration requirements were quite clear. Colonel Harrison, I've met every qualification listed on your website, submitted the required background check, and paid the full evaluation fee. I'm simply here to demonstrate my capabilities. Harrison's smile was the kind typically reserved for correcting naive children. Mrs. Mitchell, this isn't a weekend hobby class. Our precision evaluation involves engaging targets at ranges up to 1,000 yards under various environmental conditions. The shooters who participate in this program are former military snipers, Olympic competitors, and professional marksmen. He paused, allowing his words to sink in while the gathered observers nodded in appreciation of his patient explanation. I'd hate to see someone get hurt trying to perform beyond their skill level. Insurance liability alone makes it impossible for us to accommodate participants who lack proper credentials. What Harrison couldn't have known was that as he spoke, Sarah was conducting her own evaluation of him. She noted the soft hands that had never gripped a rifle in combat conditions, the slight paunch that spoke of too many desk jobs and contractor dinners, and most tellingly, the way his eyes constantly checked the reactions of his audience. This was a man who had built his identity on the approval of others, someone more concerned with perception than reality. I understand your concerns, Sarah replied, her tone remaining respectful despite the growing hostility. However, I'm confident in my abilities, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate them. Harrison's patience was clearly wearing thin. This wasn't how these conversations typically went. Harrison's jaw tightened as he realized that his usual methods of polite dismissal weren't working. Typically, a few pointed comments about the serious nature of their programs were enough to send unwelcome visitors scurrying back to more appropriate venues. Sarah's quiet persistence was forcing him into a more direct confrontation than he preferred. especially with an audience of paying clients watching his every move. "Very well," he said, his voice taking on the sharp edge that his subordinates had learned to fear. "If you insist on wasting everyone's time, we'll accommodate your request, but understand that failure to meet our standards will result in immediate expulsion from the facility, and there will be no refund of fees." The threat was delivered with the casual authority of someone accustomed to having his pronouncements accepted without question. Around the lobby, several patrons nodded in approval. Clearly anticipating the entertainment value of watching an amateur embarrass herself in front of genuine professionals, Harrison gestured toward Webb, who immediately began preparing the necessary paperwork with obvious reluctance. "Webb will get you sorted with equipment rental and safety briefings. I trust you understand that our insurance requires all participants to use facility-approved rifles and ammunition. Personal equipment isn't permitted for liability reasons." This was another subtle barrier, designed to ensure that even competent shooters would struggle with unfamiliar equipment. Harrison's facility rifles were functional but deliberately generic, lacking the custom modifications and precise calibrations that serious marksmen relied on for consistent accuracy. "That's perfectly acceptable," Sarah replied, signing the additional waivers that Webb placed before her. "I'm comfortable working with standard equipment." As Harrison prepared to leave, confident that the morning's entertainment was now properly arranged, Sarah's next words stopped him cold. "Colonel, I notice your lobby displays your personal best group at 1,000 yards 4 inches. That's quite impressive for civilian shooting." Her tone was conversational, even admiring, but something in her delivery made Harrison turn back toward her. "I assume that record was set with your personal rifle, properly zeroed and familiar?" Harrison's pride swelled at the recognition of his achievement. "Indeed, that group was witnessed by 3 Olympic-level competitors and represents the current facility record. It's not easily matched, even by experienced shooters." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine shooting an unfamiliar rifle might add considerable difficulty to such a challenge. Perhaps an inch or two of additional dispersion would be expected under those conditions." The comment seemed innocent enough, but something about the way Sarah said it triggered a warning bell in Harrison's mind. There was a confidence in her tone that suggested she wasn't simply making conversation, she was calculating, measuring, planning. "Are you suggesting you intend to attempt the 1,000-yard challenge?" Harrison asked, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. "Mrs. Mitchell, that's not part of the standard evaluation. It's reserved for our most advanced shooters." "I understand," Sarah replied calmly. "I was simply curious about your facility's capabilities. The evaluation you've arranged will be perfectly adequate for my purposes." But Harrison's competitive instincts had been aroused. The thought of this suburban housewife attempting his signature achievement was too entertaining to resist. More importantly, her inevitable failure would provide the perfect demonstration of why Blackwater Elite maintained such strict standards. "Tell you what," Harrison said, his smile returning with renewed confidence, "if you successfully complete the standard evaluation, which includes precision shooting out to 800 yards, I'll personally invite you to attempt the 1,000-yard challenge. Consider it a special accommodation for your persistence." The offer was delivered with the magnanimous air of someone granting an undeserved favor, but Sarah recognized it for what it truly was. Harrison's ego demanding the opportunity to demonstrate his superiority in the most dramatic way possible. "That's very generous, Colonel," Sarah said, accepting the challenge with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the encounter. "I look forward to the opportunity." As Harrison strode away to make arrangements, Webb leaned across the counter with barely concealed malice. "Lady, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. These guys eat amateur alive. Do yourself a favor and leave now, before you embarrass yourself in front of half the military contractors in Virginia." Sarah simply nodded and moved toward the equipment area, leaving Webb to wonder why her smile seemed more predatory than nervous. What none of them could have suspected was that Sarah Mitchell was perhaps the only person in the building who truly understood what she was getting herself into, and more importantly, what they were about to experience. The equipment room at Blackwater Elite was impressive by civilian standards, lined with precision rifles worth more than most people's cars. Webb grudgingly led Sarah through the selection process, clearly hoping she would be overwhelmed by the technical specifications and withdraw voluntarily. "This is our standard evaluation rifle," Webb said, hefting a Remington 700 with obvious satisfaction. Chambered in, 308 Winchester. Free-floated barrel. Adjustable stock. It's what 90% of our successful participants use. He paused meaningfully. Of course, it's considerably different from whatever you might have shot at your local range. Sarah accepted the rifle with movements that Webb couldn't quite categorize. She wasn't handling it like a complete novice. Her grip was correct, her finger discipline proper, but she also wasn't displaying the immediate familiarity that marked experienced shooters. What Webb failed to recognize was that Sarah was deliberately suppressing muscle memory accumulated over thousands of operational hours. 20 years earlier, First Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been one of the most classified assets in the United States military's special operations community. Her exceptional visual acuity, combined with an almost supernatural ability to process ballistic calculations under extreme stress, had made her the go-to sniper for operations where failure meant international incidents or mass casualties. Her confirmed kill count remained classified, but her unofficial nickname among those cleared to know of her existence was the Ghost, a testament to her ability to eliminate targets from impossible distances and disappear without a trace. The rifle she now held was remarkably similar to the custom weapons she had once carried into combat zones where American involvement couldn't be officially acknowledged. Sarah's military career had ended not with fanfare or recognition, but with a tragedy that still haunted her dreams. During a hostage rescue operation in Afghanistan, faulty intelligence had led her team into an ambush. While she had successfully eliminated the primary threats and saved the hostages, her spotter and husband, Staff Sergeant David Mitchell, had been killed by a secondary explosive device. The official report credited her with heroic action under fire. But Sarah knew the truth. Her hesitation to take a shot that might have saved David's life had cost her everything that mattered. Following her medical discharge for PTSD, Sarah had deliberately buried her military identity, choosing to live as quietly as possible in suburban Connecticut. For 20 years, she had successfully avoided anything that might remind her of the soldier she had once been. She worked as a freelance technical writer, maintained a modest garden, and attended grief counseling sessions where she was just another widow struggling to rebuild her life. "The scope is already zeroed for 200 yards, Webb continued, oblivious to the memories his words were triggering. "You'll need to make adjustments for longer distances. But I assume someone with your experience understands basic ballistic compensation." Sarah nodded absently, her fingers finding the rifle's familiar contours as if guided by instinct. The decision to come to Blackwater Elite hadn't been made lightly. 3 months earlier, she had discovered that Colonel Harrison had been systematically defrauding veteran disability claims, using his Pentagon connections to deny benefits to soldiers who couldn't fight back. Research into Harrison's background had revealed a pattern of corruption that stretched back years, but his connections made him virtually untouchable through official channels. Sometimes, Sarah had realized, justice required a more direct approach. The Blackwater Elite Precision Evaluation was structured as a progressive challenge designed to separate genuine marksmen from ambitious amateurs. The first stage involved static targets at 300 yards, well within the capabilities of any competent shooter, but challenging enough to expose fundamental flaws in technique or equipment. Harrison had deliberately assigned Sarah to the evaluation group that included his most accomplished instructors and several active-duty military snipers who trained at the facility. As participants gathered at the range, Sarah found herself the subject of considerable attention. Word of her confrontation with Harrison had spread through the facility, and curious spectators had positioned themselves at the observation platform to witness what many expected to be a spectacular failure. $5 says she doesn't hit paper on the first shot. One instructor whispered to another, drawing chuckles from nearby observers. "I'll take that bet," replied Major Patricia Rodriguez, an active-duty Army sniper instructor who had been quietly observing Sarah's equipment handling. "She's holding that rifle like she knows what she's doing." Harrison positioned himself prominently at the observation platform where his running commentary could be heard by everyone present, clearly intending to provide entertainment at Sarah's expense. His confidence had returned fully after arranging the evaluation parameters to ensure maximum difficulty for an amateur. "Gentlemen, observe how our civilian participant handles her equipment," Harrison announced with theatrical flair. "Note the uncertainty in her grip, the obviously unfamiliar gear, the complete lack of professional muscle memory. This is why we maintain standards at Blackwater Elite." Sarah ignored the commentary, instead focusing on the subtle environmental factors that would affect her shots. The wind was gusting irregularly from the northwest. The afternoon sun was creating thermal distortions that would affect accuracy, and the range's elevated position meant she needed to account for the angle of fire. These calculations happened automatically, processed by a mind trained to factor dozens of variables in split seconds. What Sarah couldn't ignore was the weight of the rifle in her hands, so familiar, despite 20 years of absence, that it seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Every sight picture brought back memories of David's voice in her earpiece, guiding her breathing, calling wind adjustments, providing the partnership that had made them legendary among those cleared to know their identities. "Shooters, you have 5 minutes for equipment familiarization before we begin the 300-yard stage," announced the range safety officer. "Remember, this is precision shooting, not rapid fire. Quality over quantity." Sarah settled into a prone position behind her assigned rifle, feeling the familiar weight distribution, the natural point of aim that her body remembered despite decades of suppression. Around her, other shooters made final adjustments to their equipment, custom rifles worth tens of thousands of dollars. Precision optics, hand-loaded ammunition optimized for their specific weapons. By contrast, Sarah's borrowed rifle was strictly functional. The scope was adequate but basic. The stock was standard military configuration, and the ammunition was simple factory loads rather than the match-grade rounds preferred by precision shooters. Harrison had ensured that even her ammunition would work against her, selecting loads known for inconsistent performance at extended ranges. "Mrs. Mitchell," Harrison called from the observation platform, his voice carrying clearly across the range. "Since you're our guest today, would you care to take the first shot? Give everyone a demonstration of civilian marksmanship." The invitation was delivered with false courtesy, but Sarah recognized it for what it was: an attempt to maximize her nervousness by making her perform under the scrutiny of experienced professionals. She had faced similar psychological pressure during combat operations, where enemy snipers waited for any sign of hesitation or uncertainty. "Certainly, Colonel," Sarah replied, her voice steady, despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "I appreciate the opportunity." As she settled behind her rifle and began her final preparations, Sarah felt David's presence beside her, as real as if he were physically calling the shot. Sarah's first shot struck the target's 9 ring at 300 yards. A respectable performance that drew polite applause from the observers, but clearly met Harrison's expectations for amateur competence. What the audience couldn't see was the subtle way Sarah had deliberately adjusted her natural point of aim, introducing just enough error to mask her true capabilities while still demonstrating basic proficiency. "Not terrible for a beginner," Harrison commented loudly, his confidence visibly returning. "Though I notice she's already struggling with the recoil management." The 300-yard stage tends to separate the pretenders from the contenders. Sarah's second shot moved into the 8-ring one, and her third found the 7-ringa pattern that suggested either deteriorating performance under pressure or unfamiliarity with the rifle. Harrison's smile widened as he prepared to deliver the gentle dismissal that would send her home with her dignity marginally intact. What Harrison couldn't see was the methodical way Sarah was testing the rifle's characteristics, learning its specific quirks and tendencies. Military snipers understood that every weapon was unique, with its own personality and preferences. The shots that appeared to be deteriorating performance were actually a systematic process of understanding how this particular rifle would behave when she needed it to perform perfectly. Major Rodriguez, however, was watching with different eyes. 20 years of military service had taught her to recognize genuine competence, even when it was being deliberately concealed. Sarah's body position was textbook perfect. Her breathing rhythm indicated professional training. And most tellingly, her shot group was drifting in a pattern that suggested deliberate adjustment rather than random error. "Interesting technique," Rodriguez murmured to her colleague, Captain Mike Stevens. "She's mapping the rifle's characteristics. That's not amateur behavior." Stevens nodded thoughtfully. "Her fundamentals are solid. Too solid for someone with no formal training. Either she's got natural talent that defies explanation, or there's more to her background than what's on paper." The second stage moved the targets to 500 yards and introduced moving elements mechanical targets that traversed at irregular intervals, simulating the kind of dynamic shooting situations that separated trained operators from target shooters. This was where Harrison expected Sarah to fail completely, and where his most experienced shooters typically demonstrated their superiority. Sarah's first shot at the moving target was a complete miss, drawing knowing nods from the observers and renewed commentary from Harrison. "As expected," he announced with satisfaction, "moving targets require instinctive timing that takes years to develop. Perhaps we should conclude the evaluation here and save everyone some time." But Sarah's second shot found the target's edge, and her third moved closer to center. More importantly, she was demonstrating the kind of lead calculations and timing that suggested genuine training rather than lucky guessing. By her fifth shot, she was consistently hitting the moving targets with accuracy that began to draw surprised murmurs from experienced observers. Major Rodriguez was no longer simply watching. She was studying Sarah with the intensity typically reserved for tactical assessments. The woman's improvement curve was impossible unless she was deliberately performing below her actual capabilities during the initial shots. "She's sandbagging," Rodriguez said quietly to Stevens. "Nobody improves that quickly without prior experience. She's been holding back." Harrison's confident commentary had become noticeably more subdued as Sarah's performance stabilized at a level that exceeded his expectations for amateur shooters. "Interesting improvement," he admitted grudgingly, though consistency at longer ranges requires a different level of expertise entirely. The third stage would test participants at 800 yards under simulated combat conditions, including time pressure, environmental obstacles, and multiple target engagement. This was where Harrison's reputation had been built, and where he expected to demonstrate the unbridgeable gap between amateur enthusiasm and professional competence. As Sarah prepared for this final challenge before the 1000-yard test, she felt the familiar calm settling over her, the same mental state that had once made her legendary among those cleared to know her true identity. The moment of revelation was approaching, and with it, the reckoning that Harrison's corruption had made inevitable. The 800-yard stage represented Blackwater Elite's signature challenge, where precision shooting evolved into something approaching art. At this distance, environmental factors became exponentially more Complex wind speed could vary significantly between firing position and target. Temperature differences created thermal layers that bent light, and even minor equipment inconsistencies were magnified into potential failures. Harrison had built much of his reputation on this range, routinely demonstrating competence that impressed wealthy clients and government contractors. His personal best at 800 yards, a 3-inch group, was displayed prominently in the facility's trophy case, accompanied by photographs documenting his supremacy in this demanding discipline. As Sarah approached the firing position, she became aware of the subtle shift in atmosphere. Her performance at 500 yards had been impressive enough to draw attention from other instructors, and word was spreading through the facility that something unusual was happening. A larger crowd had gathered at the observation platform, including several active-duty military personnel who understood the significance of consistent accuracy at extended ranges. The 800-yard challenge is where fantasy meets reality, Harrison announced, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. At this distance, even the smallest error in calculation or technique is magnified exponentially. Environmental factors change constantly, requiring instinctive compensation that takes years to develop. Sarah settled into her shooting position with movements that seemed almost ritualistic in their precision. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the wind patterns across her face, sensing the subtle temperature variations that would affect her shot. When she opened them again, something fundamental had changed in her demeanor. Major Rodriguez noticed it immediately, transformation from competent amateur to something else entirely. Sarah's breathing had settled into the controlled rhythm that marked a true professional. Her grip on the rifle shifted with subtle adjustments that spoke of intimate familiarity with precision shooting. And most telling of all, her body language conveyed the absolute stillness that separated trained snipers from recreational shooters. "Jesus," Rodriguez whispered to Stevens, "look at her position. That's not civilian technique, that's military protocol." Through the spotting scope, observers could see Sarah conducting calculations that seemed to involve factors most shooters never considered. She was reading wind signs in the grass at multiple distances, accounting for thermal effects from the afternoon sun, and making minute adjustments to her scope that suggested understanding of ballistic principles typically known only to professionals. Harrison found himself holding his breath as Sarah prepared for her first shot at 800 yards. Something about her transformation had triggered uncomfortable recognition in the back of his minda, nagging sense that he had encountered this level of competence before. Though he couldn't place when or where, Sarah's first shot at 800 yards struck within 2 inches of dead center, drawing immediate attention from every experienced shooter present. This wasn't lucky, shooting, or beginner's fortune. This was precision that required years of training and natural ability that couldn't be taught. Her second shot landed less than an inch from the first, and her third created a group so tight it defied belief for someone using unfamiliar equipment. The electronic scoring system, designed to measure precision to fractions of inches, was registering performance that exceeded the capabilities of most professional marksmen. "That's impossible," Webb muttered from his position behind the observation platform. "She's using a standard rifle with factory ammunition. Nobody shoots groups that tight without custom equipment." But the military snipers present recognized what they were witnessing. This wasn't equipment-dependent accuracy. This was the kind of shooting that entered into legend, performed by someone with capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. Harrison's confident commentary had ceased entirely, replaced by a stunned silence as he tried to process what he was witnessing. His carefully constructed identity as the facility's premier marksman was being systematically dismantled by a woman he had dismissed as an amateur housewife. As Sarah prepared for the ultimate challenge, the 1000-yard shot that would either confirm or destroy the reputation she had built through calculated deception, the silence on the range was absolute. Everyone present understood they were about to witness something extraordinary. The 1000-yard range at Blackwater Elite was more than just a shooting challenge. It was a monument to Harrison's ego and the ultimate test that separated his facility from ordinary gun ranges. The target itself was barely visible to the naked eye, appearing as little more than a dark speck against the distant hillside. Environmental factors at this distance became exponentially more complex. Wind speed could vary significantly between the firing position and target. Temperature differences created thermal layers that bent light and affected bullet trajectory. And even the curvature of the earth began to influence calculations. Harrison had built his reputation on this range, routinely demonstrating his competence at distances that impressed wealthy clients and government contractors. His personal besta group, measuring 4 inches at 1,000 yards, was prominently displayed in the facility's lobby, along with certificates and photographs that documented his supremacy in this most challenging discipline. As Sarah approached the firing position, the transformation was complete. Gone was any pretense of the uncertain amateur who had struggled through the early stages. In her place stood someone whose presence commanded immediate respect from every experienced shooter present. The change was so profound that several observers exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly questioning everything they thought they knew about the woman they had been watching. At this distance, even the smallest error in calculation or technique is magnified exponentially, Harrison announced, though his voice had lost all its earlier authority. Wind conditions can change between the time you pull the trigger and when the bullet reaches the target. It requires years of experience and natural talent that simply cannot be taught. Sarah settled into her shooting position, with movements that seemed almost ritualistic in their precision. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the wind patterns across her face, sensing the subtle temperature variations that would affect her shot. When she opened them again, something fundamental had shifted. The world seemed to slow down around her. Sounds became muted, and her vision seemed to sharpen until she could see details at 1,000 yards that others missed with high-powered optics. This was the zone that had made her legendary 20 years earlier, the almost supernatural state of awareness that had allowed her to make shots that defied belief. Through this altered perception, she could read wind signs invisible to others, calculate trajectory adjustments that required no conscious thought, and achieve the perfect fusion of mind, body, and weapon that separated true masters from merely excellent shooters. Major Rodriguez was watching through her own spotting scope, her professional experience allowing her to recognize the preparation techniques that marked elite-level operators. "She's using Ghost Protocol," Rodriguez whispered to Stevens, referencing advanced sniper techniques that were classified at the highest levels. Where the hell did she learn that? The shot itself seemed almost anticlimactic. Sarah's trigger pull was so smooth that observers missed the exact moment of firing, aware of it only when the rifle's report echoed across the range. The bullet's flight time at 1,000 yards was long enough for conversations to resume, for observers to speculate about placement, and for Harrison to begin formulating the gracious speech he would deliver about commendable effort falling short of professional standards. When the spotting scope revealed the impact, the silence was immediate and absolute. Sarah's bullet had not merely hit the target, it had struck the exact center with precision that the range's electronic measurement system initially refused to register. The computer recalculated multiple times before displaying measurements that indicated not just a bullseye, but shot placement accurate to fractions of an inch, at a distance that pushed the limits of both equipment and human capability. "That's impossible," Webb whispered, his voice barely audible in the stunned quiet. "The equipment must be malfunctioning." The electronic scoreboard's display shattered more than just records-it-destroyed assumptions, reputations, and carefully constructed lies. The measurements showed not only a perfect center hit, but precision that exceeded the system's ability to calculate, displaying error messages alongside numbers that defied belief. Harrison stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally, dawning horror as the implications struck home. This wasn't just a remarkable shot, it was a demonstration of capabilities that belonged in classified files, performed by someone who clearly knew far more about his background than she had initially revealed. Major Rodriguez was the first to break the stunned silence, her voice carrying across the range with professional authority. "Ma'am, I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that. Where did you train?" Sarah's response was quiet, but clear enough for everyone present to hear. "A long time ago, in places that don't exist on maps, with people whose names can't be spoken." She shouldered her equipment bag and turned toward Harrison, who had gone pale beneath his tan. "Thank you for the opportunity to shoot on your range, Colonel. It brought back some important memories." Harrison found his voice as Sarah prepared to leave. "Wait. You can't just... Who are you? Really?" Sarah paused, meeting his eyes with a gaze that held depths he had never encountered. 20 years ago, I was someone who believed that sacrifice and service meant something, someone who trusted that the system would protect those who protected others. Her voice carried the weight of betrayal and loss. "I learned better." She reached into her jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it on the equipment table with deliberate precision. "Inside, you'll find documented evidence of your fraudulent veteran claims processing, including specific case numbers, diverted funds, and communications with your Pentagon contacts. My late husband's benefits were among those you stole." Harrison's world crumbled as he recognized several classified case files visible through the envelope's edge. "You can't have access to those documents. That information is classified, Colonel. You seem to forget that some classifications run deeper than others." Sarah replied calmly. "Major Rodriguez, I believe your commanding officer would be very interested in this evidence. The FBI's Veteran Fraud Task Force has been looking for exactly this kind of documentation." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching vehicles could be heard in the distance. Sarah had made certain calls before arriving at Blackwater Elite, ensuring that the proper authorities would be positioned to act when the evidence was revealed. Harrison's legs seemed to give out as he sank onto a nearby bench, the magnitude of his exposure finally registering. 20 years of carefully constructed corruption was about to collapse in a matter of hours. "The shot was never about proving myself to you," Sarah continued, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "It was about proving to myself that some skills, earned through blood and sacrifice, never truly fade, and that sometimes the only way to obtain justice is to remind people exactly who they're dealing with." 3 months later, Harrison was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Sarah's evidence led to the recovery of over $40 million in stolen veteran benefits, restoring support to hundreds of families who had been betrayed by the system they served. The impossible shot at Blackwater Elite became legend among those who witnessed it. But Sarah Mitchell returned to her quiet life in Connecticut, satisfied that David's memory had been honored and that justice, though delayed, had finally been served. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't made with words, but with actions that speak louder than any accusation ever could.